Good afternoon, Anthony. Looking forward to discussing the topic of protein ingestion. How much and what types of protein should we as hominids be ingesting? I know you've been thinking about this at length, and I anticipate there'll be many parts to this podcast series. So looking forward to part one.
Yes, well, I'd like to start part one rather naughtily and rather mischievously with a bang rather than a whimper, because I'd like to introduce the idea that protein is largely an obsession. It's largely pseudoscience. And most of what you hear about your protein requirements and the benefits of protein in your diet are nonsense. I can be talked out of it, but that is my position.
Right.
And I suggest that we frame it from that point of view. And try to prove me wrong.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure all the bodybuilders out there, and even my son would take issue with this. He's eating a couple of eggs a day, trying to bulk up, and everyone knows you need to eat protein to bulk up. So
yes, well, you see, I understand all of that, but you see, this is one of those cases where scientific thinking is more tricky than most people realize, because you can build a case for anything. And one of the best things to remember here is the documentary phenomenon, in which you can create an hour or two of documentary footage that winds up being completely persuasive until you see the opposite documentary. And so it's very difficult to, without extreme training as a rational entity, to distinguish a bogus rationale from a good rationale. It's far from straightforward. And most trained scientists are not actually trained to do this for various reasons. So I put it to you that everything is wrong with the whole protein view. And in order to make my strongest case, so to sort of put readers' minds in a spin. Imagine there are readers and listeners out there who are convinced that I'm talking nonsense at the moment and I don't know what I'm talking about. I'd ask you, have you ever considered the following, dear listeners? We belong to the Hominidae, a family of about 7 species, maybe 8, 3 orangutans, 2 gorillas, 2 chimpanzees, and us. We're all pretty closely related. We are in the same family after all. And yet most of our living relatives, the great apes, eat extremely protein-poor diets. Not just protein-poor diets, remarkably protein-poor diets. And the epitome of that is the silverback gorilla, the macho male gorilla who is ridiculously muscular, basically lives on celery. Green rubbish that you wouldn't even have a salad of without lavish amounts of salad dressing with oil and stuff to spice it up. That's what it eats from morning till night, birth to death, and it builds all the muscle in the world and then some. In fact, silverback gorillas don't need that muscle to locomote or to defend themselves. They use it basically just as a bit like a peacock's tail, just to show off. They are Arnold Schwarzeneggers just for the kick of it, as if they have all the protein in the world. And when you look at their diet, it's almost no protein. If you ate what they ate for a living, you would really be in a tough spot. So if somebody can explain to me how it is that we are so different from all of our hominidae relatives that we somehow need an order of magnitude more protein than them just to be healthy, I'm all ears. And it's going to have to be an argument that involves growth and reproduction, because that's the main use for protein in an animal, growth and reproduction. When you're your adult size, you don't need much protein. And what you do need, you can recycle, because protein, unlike other biochemical aspects, constituents of the body, can be beautifully recycled in the form of amino acids. So every time you break down a protein molecule through denaturing, you can take the amino acids and reconstitute a molecule, as opposed to excreting the nitrogen in your urine and starting from scratch from your diet. So nothing about the whole protein thing makes sense. And I suspect that it's all just a big obsession based mainly on psychological cause. In other words, when I think protein, I think psychology. I don't think biology.
Why do humans want to perceive proteins as essential and critical to take in large amounts?
Well, that is certainly a can of worms that I would love to open in detail. But just to give you a sort of a teaser, I think it comes partly from propaganda, vested interests. I think it comes partly from our experience with our own domestic animals, who are indeed demanding of protein intakes at least an order of magnitude greater than ours, because they grow an order of magnitude faster than we do. That's why they are our farmed animals. And it also comes from some deep psychological yearning for some kind of power in the diet that can rapidly transform us into powerful beings. And there's also probably, I think, an initial accident, because a lot of these kinds of search images that we have about diet, whether it's choline or protein or various other things, comes from an initial RDA assessment, a recommended daily dose assessment that perhaps, again, I'm being mischievous here, it was just a thumb suck in the first place. So if somebody wants to do this with real scientific rigor, I'd say go back to the initial establishment of the recommended daily requirements and tell me how they established that. Really be critical about how they got those numbers, which in some cases were first created just after during the Second World War, where the Americans had to plan rations for large populations of soldiers. And they were, the military asked them, how much do these people need of protein and so on? And because scientists tend to have this aura of authority, I think they felt under the gun to come up with some number, and they had no real scientific basis to come up with a number. So they came up with something, and then everybody else has run with it ever since. And it wouldn't be the first time that mistakes have been made in the field of human diets, as we know from the whole food pyramid thing and the whole anti-saturated fat thing. I mean, in fact, the whole dietary aspect of science is in disgrace. And all I'm doing is I'm extending that disgrace, which is now widely appreciated in the context of the food pyramid and the crusade against saturated fats. And I'm simply extending it sideways to the field of protein. And I'm suggesting that you don't need any more protein than your hominid cousins in the gorillas, the chimpanzees, and the orangutans.
And won't some listeners say, well, within a family, there can be a wide range of diets. So is it really that unusual to have some member eating celery and another eating a lot of meat?
Well, to make that case, you'd either have to invoke a change in growth rate and reproductive rate, which does not apply, because we humans, second to orangutans, are the slowest growing mammals for our body size on the planet. We are astonishingly slow growing. And that is no different in principle from our ape cousins. Orangutans are a little slower growing. Gorillas and chimpanzees a little faster growing, but we're all very much in the same ballpark. Okay, or else it would have to come from some kind of argument invoking an inefficiency of digestion, such that perhaps because we learned to cook and we learned to hunt, we had so much protein that our bodies needed to get more just because we're not as efficient in extracting it. Okay, a sort of how can I put it? Yes, a degradation in efficiency based on a technical advantage in getting it. But you see, that doesn't make any sense, because I don't think that you can muster a good argument for our hunter-gatherer ancestors having been awash in protein. Protein is hard stuff to get. It's a question of the food pyramid in the sense of the energy pyramid. Protein is by its nature relatively rarefied in food webs and food chains, and so it just doesn't make sense to me that our ancestors had so much protein that we evolved this much greater requirement for it than our ape cousins. It's a difficult argument to make. And we also know that, take the Vietnam War, for example. I mean, sure, fog of war means you can't rely on anything. But if you believe the trope that the Vietnamese, the valiant little Vietnamese, resisted the chunky, well-fed, protein-sozzled American soldiers by just having half a bowl of rice every day, hiding in the jungle, living in underground conditions, and just being persistent. Do we really think that those Vietnamese mustered that long-term vigor in their war against the Americans by eating a lot of protein? I doubt it. I think they were doing it on almost no protein at all, apart from a few insects they could gather every now and again in the jungle. They were just basically eating rice, maybe eating some herbs from the jungle. They probably went years with minimal protein, and they won the war. So I'm not saying that this line of argument is as persuasive to me as my comparison with the hominidae, which I think is scientifically more on firmer ground. But there's too many loose ends, there's too many contradictions, there's too many incongruencies, there's too many things that don't add up. And I just don't believe it. It makes no sense to me that we need all that protein.
The gorillas and the orangutans are still getting amino acids and proteins out of their herbivorous diet. So there is protein intake. It's just that human societies seem to take the view that the protein needs to come from animal matter. Is that the distinction here that we're discussing?
Well, yes, thanks for raising that. Yes, there's two questions here. There's a question of quality and there's a question of quantity. And I'm not talking about the quality question at the moment. One can discuss the quality question, the fact that you need certain amino acids in certain quantities. I'm just talking about the sheer amount, because this trope has arisen now, particularly in health-conscious people, bodybuilders, fitness enthusiasts, and so on, that you need, in the American terms, 1 gram of protein per day per pound of body mass. Please excuse the pound thing. That's an American thing. But as you know, a kilogram contains 2.2 pounds. So if you weigh 100 pounds body weight, then according to the commonly accepted trope, you need 100 grams of protein per day. That is a lot of protein. If you put it in the context of the sort of diets that we adapted to as hunter-gatherers. I doubt it. I doubt that we need even 10 grams of protein per day for a 100-pound adult woman, for example. I just don't believe it. I just think that somebody came up with that figure. It's stuck. It's kind of become, it's accreted authority over time. It's got an inertia of its own, and it panders to the psychology of people who think that, in an affluent world where protein is quite easily available and cheap, there's a kind of psychology where if I do more of that, I'll be a better and stronger person. It's a very appealing myth. But you see, the moment you go sideways to the apes, I think that's the most important thing for people. If people want to tell me, look, Anthony, you're full of rubbish here. You're talking nonsense. You're against the whole scientific community. You don't have a leg to stand on. I'll say, explain the apes. I'm all ears. I'll wait. Explain the apes to me. Explain gorillas to me.
Yeah.
Where gorillas are getting not only good quality protein, but lots of it to build that fantastic body. Yeah. And I'll learn something from that. Okay.
Okay.
And the fact that they've got a more voluminous colonic system doesn't make any difference, because yes, they do ferment their vast quantities of fibrous greens in their colon for essential fatty acids, but you can't digest any protein in your hindgut. So the fact that they have a better hindgut fermentation system than we do makes a difference to their energetics. It makes no difference to their protein. All the protein that arises in the microbial biomass in their colon gets pooped out. So the only protein a gorilla gets is what is freely available in the celery and other greens at the stomach stage.
Right.
And if you ate nothing but what a gorilla eats, good luck. Good luck. I'm not saying you wouldn't be protein deficient. I'm saying that we are just a shade of gray different. We're in that same ballpark. We don't need much more protein than a gorilla. A gorilla is a more specialized herbivore, but we're in that same zip code. We're not an order of magnitude different in our protein requirements in terms of quantity.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. That's a great challenge to the listeners, because probably only 1 in 100 listeners are going to run with this immediately and think, no, that I buy that. I think 99% would probably say, no, there's got to be something wrong here. So looking forward to part 2s and 3s to delve into this further, Anthony. I think perhaps we should look at how many grams of protein a gorilla is indeed likely to be taking in with in its natural setting. I'm sure we could dig that out of the literature as a first step.
Oh, I'd be absolutely delighted if somebody did the minute, punctilious accounting of protein intakes in all the great ape species and then compared it with humans. But in the absence of that, I don't think we really know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll be surprised and we'll find that these apes have a lot more protein in their diets than I think. But until that's studied, I don't think we're really thinking straight about this.
Good. Look forward to the next chapter on this.
All right. And to listeners, please like, subscribe, and share. I trust you found this particular item as provocative as is useful. And until we see you here at Exploring the Bio Edge next time, over and out from us.
Cheers.